it's a fool's errand trying to do the perfect, right? I often say to people, I'm like, don't even exercise. Like, just do the slow carb diet for 30 days. Once you've done that for 30 days, then we'll throw some resistance training in. It can increase muscle mass, which increases your metabolic rate, which can aid with the whole fat loss process. But to say to someone, no, you've got to do slow carb and resistance training, and you've got to do freezing cold showers 4 times a day, it's just not sustainable.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a lower rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/cwarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. Health IQ customers can save up to a third because physically active people have a 56% lower risk of heart disease, 20% lower risk of cancer, and 58% lower risk of diabetes compared to people that are inactive. But your life insurance company probably just doesn't care. You care, and there are companies out there that care. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/cwarrior or mention the promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. Hey guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your health, exercise, business, and lifestyle. My former guests include paleo pioneers Mark Sisson, Rob Wolf, zero carb carnivore Dr. Sean Baker, high intensity training experts like Doug McGuff and Drew Bay, successful serial entrepreneurs, sports scientists, New York Times bestselling authors, bodybuilders, time management gurus, and everything in between. This was a very different and very fun episode to record. Your guest today is yours truly, moi. I was interviewed by the founder of Mobility.co and the desk-bound podcast, Brandon Olin. In this interview, we discuss my journey from B2B technology salesperson to full-time podcaster, the benefits of resistance training and high-intensity strength training, anti-aging, why high-intensity training is a great fit for a busy professional, the importance of adding one small new habit at a time, the slow-carb diet, common training mistakes, how to manage volume and frequency, and much, much more. This was a really fun experience. I really enjoyed I always enjoy being a guest on other people's podcasts, and hopefully you will get a lot out of this and enjoy this perspective on training and diet from myself. For all of the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. Don't forget to hang around at the end of this for your free gift from me. And now I give you yours truly on high intensity training and diet.
I am joined on the podcast today by Lawrence Neal. Lawrence, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Did you almost call me McNeil then?
No, just a slip of the tongue there. So Lawrence, could you give us a quick background, what you do, how you got to this point, and sort of what inspired you to work on what you do?
Yeah, so I guess my full-time job now is running a podcast and blog called Corporate Warrior, which is focused on high-intensity strength training, high-intensity training and high-intensity training business. So basically what I do is I interview world-class experts on the subject of high-intensity training. So it's quite niche. And I do long form, so typically 1 to 2 hours. And I just try and ask questions to understand all of the nuances of health and fitness and exercise and nutrition to try and help my listeners. And the other side of it, as I mentioned, is high intensity training business. So a lot of my listeners have personal training studios or businesses that are in high intensity training, and they're looking to figure out how they can grow, or if they haven't yet started, start and tackle some of the obstacles within their business. So it's been going for about just over 3 years now. I started it as a side a side gig, a side hustle, whilst I was working in a full-time job in B2B technology sales in London in the UK. And now I live in Galway, which is a city in Ireland, of all places, and running this as a business full-time. So it's been a really fun journey, and it's starting to get a lot more interesting now as now things are picking up, and obviously the listenership has grown significantly. The opportunities are starting to become very interesting. So yeah, really, really fun.
Excellent. And could you give the listeners just a brief description of how high intensity training specifically is different from whatever normal type of lifting or training that they've done in the past?
Sure. So when most people think of weight training or lifting, they think of, resistance training, typically with free weights or machines, usually multiple sets. So typically someone would do anywhere from 3 to 5 sets, perhaps. And they might work out a few times a week, and work out quite intensely. And that would be, I think, most people's paradigm when it comes to resistance training or weight training. High intensity training is like an offshoot of that, which is a more focused and efficient form of resistance training, in my opinion. So what high intensity training is it's resistance training. So it can be performed with body weight or free weights or machines. And it's typically performed with one set to muscular failure. So for instance, an example workout might be a Big Five, which is made popular by a book called Body by Science by Dr. Doug McGuff. And the Big Five workout is a chest press. So let's use machines, for example, a chest press machine, a pull down, so a lat pull down machine, a seated row, an overhead press, and a leg press. So those 5 movements are going to cover the entire musculature of the body. And your objective is to train to muscular failure. So you tend not to train explosively or fast. The emphasis is on exercising with a lot of control and with good form. That doesn't necessarily mean these sets have to be done in a super slow fashion, but just so that the turnarounds at either end of the movement are smooth and the form is very, very good. And then if you're doing that, 1 set to failure, once you've done your 1 set, you move on to the next machine or next workout, next exercise. And then once you've done the 5th exercise, you finish the workout. Obviously, there are lots of nuances and evolutions of that template, but that is the basic high-intensity training workout template, which I've become very passionate about because it's such an effective and efficient way to train the body's musculature. And once you've trained muscles to failure, and we're seeing this in a lot of the scientific literature now, there are so many benefits that occur as an offshoot of that. And that's stimulated by that.
Yeah, excellent. And yeah, of course, there's, a million subdivisions and little niches within niches of every single different type of workout and every single different type of diet. So, that's a good, broad way to view it, or just a basics to look at it from. Now, it sounds like you're training the muscles to essentially exert the greatest amount of effort and do the greatest amount of, not damage, but put the muscles under the greatest amount of stress that you can. Now, do you know offhand, or could you give us some basics of what are the metabolic benefits? What are the health benefits of training that way as opposed to the way people often train?
Yeah, so obviously, just a caveat: I'm no scientist, but I'm more of an incredibly passionate, enthusiastic hobbyist who started a podcast. So obviously, having interviewed over 90 experts and trained in this way myself, I feel confident in what I'm saying. Although, in terms of the actual mechanisms, I'm a little bit hazy. So I do my best. But yeah, so in terms of what you're stimulating when you go to that, when you use that level of effort, so in terms of strength training, if you're training to failure, you are going to stimulate improvements in strength, improvements in muscle mass. And we know that strength and muscle mass is correlated with healthy aging. We know that if you don't do some form of resistance training, doesn't have to be high intensity training, that one's physical capability declines with age. And that means they're less capable of doing very basic movements and living a normal life. So that's a pretty important thing. And what's really fascinating is when you stimulate the muscles with strength training, and you're increasing the muscle mass and the strength, you're also improving things like insulin sensitivity. So your ability to tolerate more glucose and drive glucose into the muscle and prioritize that, as opposed to it going by default into fat storage and stuff like that. Improvements in cardiovascular conditioning. So what a lot of people don't know is that, aerobic and anaerobic metabolism are one and the same. So whether you're running down the street or you're doing a leg press, the body can't really discern the difference. All it knows is that you're doing mechanical work with muscle. I'm really parroting a lot of the stuff that Dr. Doug McGuff has said in Body by Science, which I do encourage the listeners to purchase and read that. And so you're getting that cardiovascular conditioning aspect of the workout. There's other benefits like improved blood pressure. And there's a study that came out, I think it was a year or two ago, which showed that strength training can actually reverse aging. So it reverses the expression in a number of genes. It's something like 190 genes or just over that, were actually showed to reverse the expression to a youthful one, which, if you're looking for the fountain of youth, I really think this is probably the closest thing we have to it at the moment. And I am honestly scratching the surface. There's bone mineral density improvements, gastrointestinal tract reduction in that. There's a lot of benefits that come from strength training. And what I like about high intensity training is that it's an efficient way of achieving the same end goal and the same outcome, because of its intensity and safe intensity, but because of its demand on the body. You can't do it for all that long, so it's very efficient and effective for obviously people that are very busy, which I'm sure we'll come on to. So
absolutely, yeah. And that's something that's been really great to see. A lot of people wouldn't go to the gym or do any heavy lifting or anything like that because I'm not that interested in, looking like Schwarzenegger or anything like that. I just want to be healthy. But as you said, it can have this anti-aging effect of helping you avoid a lot of those, these detrimental health effects that are sort of becoming common in the modern world. And, I had plenty of friends who were working desk jobs who would have, really messed up, like hands or wrists or back pain in their 20s and 30s. And, in a way that's like premature aging, and we need to figure out this way to sort of swing the pendulum in the other direction, so to speak.
Definitely.
It was very interesting. You said, that high intensity training is a great way to get these benefits in a very safe way. And I had read through my own research about high intensity that it is oftentimes done with lower weights than you would do for the kinds of exercises people are already doing. Is that the case? And could you dive into that real quick?
Absolutely. So, this is the thing. When people hear the word intensity, it's got like a very scary connotation to it, and it can seem quite abstract to some people. But really, all it means is the level of effort you're using at any moment in time. And so, if you do enough repetitions of a very light weight, it's going to be pretty intense by the end of it. It's been shown that you can train with light loads or heavy loads, and so long as you're using a significant amount of effort and you're working to failure, that you're going to get very, very similar outcomes in terms of muscle hypertrophy, which is just a fancy word for muscle gain, and strength and all of the other adaptations that I described earlier. So I'm not sure. I've lost my train of thought a little bit. Have I answered the question fully there? Or? Yeah,
definitely. And when you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the big 5 workouts. If I recall correctly, those were all the workouts you mentioned were all done on machine. Is there any particular benefit of machine versus free weights? And could you dive into that as well?
Yeah. So the reason Doug would advocate machines, and I've interviewed Doug several times, so I have a good idea of what he would say in this instance, is that because resistance training can be very uncomfortable for people, especially when you start getting towards failure, because you want to hit failure because that's where you're going to get most of the positive adaptations. If you fall short of that, you're not going to have as a productive workout. But when people get obviously close to that, it can be quite uncomfortable for them, so they tend to quit. Now, the benefit of using machines over, say, body weight or free weights is that you have to you think about less things. All you have to really worry about is moving this weight up and down.
Right.
Okay, there are some obviously corrections one needs to make in terms of their form, but the attention you have to pay to form in a context of machines is much less than body weight or free weights. For instance, with body weight, if you're doing a body weight squat to failure, it's challenging enough just taking your glutes and your lower body muscles to failure, let alone balancing and all the rest of it. So if people have access to machines, then it's ideal. But at the same time, if you don't, it doesn't mean you can't do this type of exercise. There are free weight and body weight alternatives. It depends on what you have access to.
Yeah. Obviously, that I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, you really need to focus so intently on this one thing. So if you're doing, say, an overhead press on a machine, you can focus more on that as opposed to, not dropping this weight on your skull. That's, that's a pretty important detail there. Very, very cool. So, with your podcast, with your audience and, the people who follow what you do, if you had to, take a guess, if you don't know offhand, how often would you say that those people have desk jobs, or like what percentage of the people who are into this sort of thing work from a desk?
I can't give you an exact percentage. I've polled my audience before, but it's really difficult to get your entire audience in a podcast format to actually participate.
Fair enough.
But that being said, just from engaging with a large number of my listeners, I'd say, a large percentage do have desk jobs. I mean, hey, how many knowledge workers do we have today? I mean, most of us, right? Yeah. So I know that from the income levels, it's fairly high income with my listeners, and that would also correlate typically with desk jobs. So it's interesting that you raise that point, because those that have desk jobs tend to be very busy. They tend to work, long hours. So something like high intensity training or just an efficient form of resistance training is very, very appealing to those people and very useful. Obviously, it's not going to address everything, as you know, with your business, but it will address. It will be, in my opinion, the main dose of exercise that they should get that week. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, while we're on that subject, we talked about this a bit before we started the podcast, but, this is a common reason that many people don't stick with working out or exercise or anything like that, is that they're so busy all the time. They got to get ready for work. They got to commute into the office. I think like the length of the average commute in the U.S. is about 25 minutes each way. You've got unpaid lunch breaks and all this kind of stuff. They don't want to spend their precious free time exercising. So if people could only find the time, and motivation, to work out once a week, could they get good results just doing that once a week high intensity workout? Do you think that would still give them a good deal of benefit? Not 100% of the benefit, but could they get like a, 20% of the or 20% of the time invested, 80% benefit type of
Pareto law? Exactly. Yeah. Let me just grab my power 1 sec.
Sure.
I just realized I didn't have the power, which was a bit of a risky thing there.
You're treating your battery to fatigue.
Yeah, very good, very appropriate.
Yeah.
So actually, this is going to probably surprise you, and you may not even believe me. But so high intensity training is so demanding and so challenging that one can't really do it in terms of with a high frequency and volume, because you really have to try it to really appreciate it. But once you've gone through a workout, you certainly won't want to do much more that day from an exercise point of view. And certainly if you're new to it, you won't want to do it for a couple of days. Most people in the high intensity training community don't work out more than twice a week.
Really?
Really, I'm serious. And this is going to shock you even more. Myself and many in this community, and many people that are just in resistance training in general, and even the scientists, the guys, putting together the literature that we're referring to, they believe that this is the optimal stimulus, that actually a dose greater than this, so that the typical like bro split or, like 5 or 6 workouts a week is actually it's going to cause some people to overtrain, and for a lot of people, it's just not necessary. And the gains one can get from more volume and frequency are in most cases very, very marginal. And in fact, one's response from exercise is pretty much completely determined by their genetics. I'm an ectomorphic guy, right? I'm quite slim. I'm lightly muscled. There's no way I'm ever going to be a Mr. Olympia, even if I did, I worked out for 4 hours a day, because as I've already explained, that's kind of antithetical to training anyway, and that one would overtrain, but I just don't have the genetics. And what you get is you get a huge selection bias. So when you go to the gym, you see all these big guys and you think, oh, they train here all the time, that's why they're big. But really, they train there because they get results. Whereas the average Joe goes, he doesn't get results, or she doesn't get results, and she doesn't come back. So you're seeing a huge swath of people who are actually genetically predisposed to do well in that activity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of funny. I was talking with a friend about this the other day, how, when it comes to, health and exercise and dieting, a lot of people sort of swing back and forth between two very extreme, positions. They'll, be eating garbage and drinking all the time and things like that. And then I don't know if it's guilt or whatever, but whatever it was that they felt for that, now they're getting into exercise. So they're going to pick up as you said, a 5 or 6 day a week special forces level training regimen and eat the strictest, paleo buzzword laden diet that they can muster. And then they do that for like a week and they want to die, and they wonder, oh, why couldn't I stick with it? There must be something wrong with, my dedication or something like that. It's like, no, you weren't ready for that. And to be honest, maybe as you're saying, the human body isn't even ready to handle that to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I know where you're going with this, because I think it's so important. Anyone who's trying to get results, be it lose body fat or gain muscle, you can't take on a lot of habits or a lot of new habits. And like you say, turning your whole, and I'm quoting Dr. Doug McGuff here, but turning your life into Navy SEALs buds training is not going to help you, which is something he said, which I thought was so on the money. Now, when it comes to improvement, or because I do a bit of coaching on the side and consulting, and where I help people achieve, their goals in terms of body transformation. And, if you've got someone who is like right on the other end of the spectrum, where they haven't, they're over fat and they haven't done exercise for ages, then you really want to start off with something really small. I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss's slow carb diet. I don't use it myself now. I kind of evolved to do other things, but I've used it in the past very, very successfully. And the reason it works so well, and I listened to an interview you did, and you said it's because it's not the perfect, but it's the good. It's the good diet that one can comply with for long term. And that's the challenge. A lot of these diets, even a ketogenic diet, as effective as it is for a lot of people, it's so hard to comply with.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was my first dive, into, after I'd finished university and all that, and I, put on the freshman 15 weight, and I wanted to get back in shape. Keto was the thing that I dove into, and I did manage to stick with it for about 6 months, and it got me the results. Oh, wow. But yeah, afterwards I was like, I never want to do that again. That was absolutely miserable.
And now it's time for a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a lower rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/cwarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/cwarrior or mention a promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. And now back to the show.
Yeah. That's something that I've found is kind of a great, life philosophy in general, but particularly as it pertains to health and wellness, is that old Voltaire quote that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And so many people strive for perfect after, years and years of sticking with horrific. So it's, find the good solution that you can keep up with for the long term, because that's really, really what's important. Good health it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, you're right. It's a fool's errand trying to do the perfect, right? Mm-hmm. And I often say to people, I'm like, don't even exercise. Like, don't. Like, mm-hmm. I'm talking obviously about the people that I described earlier. Like, just do the slow carb diet for 30 days. Once you've done that for 30 days, then we'll throw some resistance training in, because resistance training, as I described earlier, it can increase muscle mass, which increases your metabolic rate, which can aid with the whole fat loss process. Mm-hmm. But trying to do, to say to someone, no, you've got to do slow carb and resistance training, and you've got to do freezing cold showers 4 times a day, or which cold exposure has been shown to help this as well. It's just not sustainable for most people. So. Yeah, maybe for freak outliers like you and I, but
perhaps, yeah. I thought that was interesting that he threw that in there. He was like, "Oh, these very simple ways of getting the improvements you want. Oh, the slow carb diet is very simple, and this very basic, well, not basic, but this very simple, easy to understand exercise routine that I think might have been the Big Five or something very similar to it."
Well remembered. So he recommends kettlebells for weight loss, but yeah, he in the Geek to Freak section, he references Doug McGuff and Body by Science, and he uses a Big Five high intensity training protocol. And he doesn't say it specifically, although no, he does say it in the context of fat loss for women. He does say that a Big Five will work well in conjunction with a slow carb diet. So.
Yeah, I find it funny that those two things come across as very simple. He's like, oh, you can also jump in an icy bathtub full of water. And it's like, can you imagine the level of motivation that's going to take the average person to do? I mean, are you familiar with the Tough Mudder?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I've done the Tough Mudder twice now. And, jumping in that shipping container full of icy cold water is just about the worst thing imaginable. So, if you really want to try it, people who are listening, by all means, but I would not recommend it whatsoever.
When you have to run after that, it's horrendous because your muscles are so, I don't understand exactly the mechanism, but they feel so seized up after you've jumped out of that, especially if it's a cold climate or wherever, where you're running. It's horrific experience doing that.
It's not fun whatsoever. I don't know how cold exposure and cramps and all those play with each other, but it's a potent cocktail of just mayhem. So I was going to ask, about some of the, recommendations for people who are diving into this for the first time, if they're, if they've been neglecting their health for a while, they haven't worked out in a while. But as you said, start off with something simple and easy to adhere to, like a slow carb diet. So let's say somebody hypothetically does that. They've done their, 30 days or so of the slow carb diet. They're starting to lose weight. How would you recommend they dive into high intensity training once they've sort of, dipped their toes into being healthy again? What would you say is the next, logical step?
So what I would say is they buy a copy of Body by Science. So I probably sold so many copies of this book for Doug because I talk about it all the time on my own podcast. Uh-huh. But I would buy that book, read it, and then this is the great thing about the US is you've got so many high intensity trainers in the US. Mm-hmm. So chances are there's someone local to that person who has a studio and because it's like anything, it's a really quite tight community, like everyone knows each other. Mm-hmm. So if you go in and say, hey, I've read this, as long as you go to a high intensity training studio and you say, hey, I've read this book, I want to do this training, they'll know exactly what to do. They'd have trained hundreds of people, if not thousands, just like you. So that if you've got access to a trainer, that is the ideal way to start. Mm-hmm. And typically they'll have you do a workout like we've described once or twice a week, maybe more, but really depends on your genotype and also your goals. If you don't have access to a trainer, the book is great and it does lay out some like the Big Five. It lays out exactly how to execute it, all of the variables, frequency, all of that stuff. So to be honest, so long as if you've got a gym nearby and and it will typically have those machines that I described, then great, go for it and just learn on your own, or maybe go with a friend. If you've got a friend who's in a similar boat to you, or a friend who just wants to help you achieve your goals, then, team up and get them to go along with you and spot you and just help you out. And, because they can then measure your performance from exercise to exercise. And if you haven't got a facility near you, then that's slightly more challenging because it means you have to
basically work with what you have at home. But I work out from home, and I'm a little bit more advanced. I've been doing this training for a very long time. But there's a book called Project Kratos, which is a rather elaborate name, but it's a body weight, high intensity training book written by a guy called Drew Bay, who's very, very well known in high intensity training. He also featured in 4 Hour Body, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and that book is excellent in terms of laying out all the principles and how to execute a very, very effective bodyweight workout with very minimal equipment. So that's what I would say in terms of the order of how you should approach it.
Excellent. Yeah, I had heard something similar before when it comes to any sort of training to failure, that it can be good if you have a friend there who can, give you just like a little bit of assistance so you can push yourself a little bit farther than you'd normally be able to. So, training with a friend if it's an option, and then, training by yourself at a gym, and then body weight. Is that the general order of preference?
I think, well, that's just my opinion based on what I think would be easiest for people, because I'm kind of trying to address the newbie who's not familiar with this type of thing. Like,
sure.
That is what I would say to someone new. Yeah.
Great. All right. And are there any sort of common mistakes that you see a lot of people make when they first try to get into high intensity training that you could say, like, hey, for sure, do not do this, even if you really want to do this?
I think this might not be the sort of thing that would come to mind. But one of the things I think people expect is that they're going to do a regimen and they're going to improve every single week. Now, if you read Body by Science, when you start getting into this stuff, you will be taught that you can get gains every week in terms of improving time under load, which is all reps or volume, or increasing resistance. Now, at the beginning, yes, if you've never done strength training before, you're going to get what they call newbie gains, which is where people will gain if they're very atrophied, or they're very young, have never done strength training. You're going to see a huge regardless of really your genetic predisposition, you're going to see a substantial amount of muscle mass initially, and then that quickly dies off after a year or two. You've tapped that out, and then it's very, very incremental after that, because everyone's got a genetic ceiling, and it becomes very difficult to try and eke that out. So really, my advice would be, when you get to a certain point in your program, don't look at your results in the short term, look at them over the longer term. So if you do a workout one week and then you train the next week and you're like, oh, my results weren't as great, maybe I need more recovery, that's not necessarily true. And what mistake people can make is they start separating their workouts further and further apart to provide the recovery required to then execute that workout better than the one before. But there's too many variables that affect recovery for that to be the reason. So one would be better off waiting for over a 6-week period. And then if you see a trend where you see, okay, actually my numbers are falling or I'm stagnating or whatever, then you need to address the protocol. That might mean less volume in the session. And just for reference, Body by Science has lots of stuff about this. Or there's like 4 plugs and I don't even get a commission. What was I saying? Yeah. So either you'll need to decrease the volume or increase the recovery interval between workouts. Or it might mean that you need to address your sleep or your diet, and there are many variables that affect recovery, but I say those are the main ones. I'm just also thinking common mistakes. I would say, another common mistake is mistaking the discomfort you feel when you're like you were saying earlier, like when you're at the end of a set and you feel like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, I want to give up. People mistake that for, they give up too early, and they mistake that for a warning sign that they should quit, when really you should push through that. So, and it's important to distinguish the difference between pain and muscular discomfort. They're very different things. Obviously, if you're experiencing any pain, I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on the internet, Tim Ferriss. You gotta make sure you consult that person. But so long as if you're experiencing pain, then yes, you should absolutely stop what you're doing immediately. But if it's just discomfort, you should really try and push that right through to muscular failure. And muscular failure is when you can't move the resistance anymore. And you might just want, even when you can't move it anymore, you want to kind of just continue to contract against it for a few seconds just to really make sure that you've hit failure. Once you're there, put the weight down very slowly, obviously, and under control, and then move on to the next exercise. So those are the mistakes I see, but it's hard to go wrong, really. I mean, look, to be honest, like the advice really should be just lift weights, just do some kind of resistance training. And so long as you're doing it safely, you're going to get good results, regardless of the protocol. I'm just talking about what I consider to be the most efficient and effective way to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, but once you reach that point where you can't lift the bar or push the thing any further, even just holding it completely still and contracting against that is still going to give you a little bit more of that training your muscles to failure points. Yeah,
I mean, moving weights is arbitrary, right? Because all you're trying to do is contract muscle fiber, and this is cool, right? You don't have to be moving something to contract muscle fiber. I can do a really good workout right now in this room, called a time static contraction workout, where I'm just using objects to contract against. So, for instance, I'll try and give you an example. So, I could lie on the floor on my back, and with my arms up here, I don't know if the camera can see that. My arms up to my sides like that, I can drive my elbows into the floor, and that will almost perform like a rowing motion.
Yeah.
And I will drive my elbows into the floor and contract as I do like a 30-30-30 approach, where I would do 30 seconds, 50% intensity, 30 seconds, 75% intensity. And obviously intensity is subjective, and you have to think about that. But the last 30 seconds would be as hard as I can. And you do that. And trust me, you should try it after this, Brandon. It is very intense, and you will reach the same level of muscular fatigue you would if you were on a seated row, or if you're doing a barbell row, like a bent over row.
Really?
That's with nothing. Absolutely.
Is this part of just a little snippet from Project Kratos that we just got there, a little sneak peek?
Indeed. Well, that was well observed.
I looked into Project Kratos beforehand just because the area of town that I'm living in doesn't have too many good gyms, so I might have to dive into something like that, even if it means, doing some sort of body weight movement, training to failure, and then, ending up planting my face into the ground accidentally.
That sounds ideal.
So I did have a couple of other questions for you, but it looks like we sort of, in a roundabout way, already addressed them with some of the things we discussed. There was one thing that I wanted to ask, though, because it sort of came up earlier, and this is more for my own curiosity and interest than, for any of the viewers, though they might get some benefit from this. How would you view how would you space it out if you're going to do high intensity training, but you wanted to get other types of activity or exercise in? And, in my case, that's because I have a deep-seated interest in any sort of combat sports. So I've trained in like jujitsu and Muay Thai, and I'm currently training at a boxing gym. And how would you, avoid taking away from the benefits of high intensity training while getting other activity in? Say somebody wants, they just play like pickup soccer games. Like, how would you space that out, and how would you figure out how to make all of this balance well together?
That is a really good question. And it's a question I asked a lot at the start, and I still continue to ask to an extent. I'll first caveat this answer by saying that it's incredibly individual. Like, we all have very different recovery capability. But one of the things the listeners must understand is that, resistance training, and in particular high intensity training, is incredibly intense in terms of the muscular contraction and fatigue and stimulation versus mixed martial arts, which, okay, it's fairly intense, but it's not quite to the same level unless your coach has you doing all the, I don't know if you call him the coach or whatever, has you doing like loads of push-ups, then yeah, I guess you are going to end up doing a fair amount of strength training. But yeah, it really depends on the intensity of the activity. But it's really, really individual. Personally, I will, if I'm doing high intensity training once or twice a week, I definitely will not do any other resistance training, but I play basketball. So I'm quite happy for myself to play basketball the day after I train. Probably not on the same day typically, but the day after. in an ideal world, I'd have a day off after a training session. But I think what people find, especially people that are quite sedentary originally before they start doing resistance training, is once you do it, you activate. Well, again, this is not my words, but this is the coming out of the literature is we are activating this active genome when we do resistance training that makes you more physically capable and therefore makes you want to move more. So what a lot of trainers find, and what I've found speaking to people, is once you start doing this training and obviously building more muscle mass and physical capability, what happens? You want to do more stuff, right? You want to go for hikes. You want to take up a sport that you used to do in your youth or whatever. You just want to be more active in general. And I found that with myself. I can't stand sitting or being stationary for a long period of time, having obviously done this training for a fair amount of time. So I don't know if that kind of is a dodgy answer, because there's no cookie cutter answer to that.
Yeah.
But I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some useful bits of information. So I would say, obviously it's going to depend on the intensity of the activity, but if you're an absolute beginner, it's probably best to take a day off after. Maybe,
I would say so.
What did you say? A day off before would be a good idea as well?
Well, I would say I wouldn't do any resistance training probably 3 or 4 days before your first high intensity training session, because you want to be fresh. You want to be able to bring it. And obviously if you're fatigued from other activities, intense activities, then you might struggle to do that. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, based on the way you've described the intensity of this, it sounds like, people are going to be wanting to scream plenty of 4-letter words at their trainer, by the time they're done with this workout.
Pretty much. Yeah. It's very exhausting, but I want to just reinforce that it's incredibly safe. And no one's, the injury rates in high intensity training gyms are almost nil. It's so, if you were to compare it to CrossFit, it's the complete opposite when it comes to safety, because CrossFit is not safe. I'm just going to say that now. Yeah,
that's going to have to be a topic for an entirely different podcast. Interesting. Yeah. So let's see, what else did we have? So I was going to ask, if you could recommend one, what would be one book that you recommend that people read who are interested in diving into high intensity training? But I think, we all know now that that's going to be Body by Science.
Will be. I don't want to overcomplicate it by recommending anymore. I just think that's the book, people, because it's important to note that it's not well, obviously there is a bias in that it's promoting high intensity training, but really the book is a great gateway drug into the benefits of resistance training. So even though I just put CrossFit down, CrossFit, if performed in the right way, is at the end of the day resistance training. So you're going to get the same sort of benefits. So yeah, that's the book I'd recommend.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's one that I still haven't had a chance to read, but I definitely plan to. And I don't know if this is the case, but just, based on the name, it sounds like it takes an approach similar to basically the type of approach that I like, of sort of explaining the underlying mechanics at play that cause this to be a good thing, instead of just somebody hyping up their new diet about how, you should do this because of this. The first book that I read when I dove into ketogenic diets was Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Taubes, whatever it is. And it was brilliant because, once I finally understood what was causing certain things to be bad, it was much easier to justify avoiding them or doing things the right way. So would you say that Body by Science has a similar effect?
Oh, absolutely. So Dr. Doug McGuff is a ER physician, actually. He's a emergency room physician, but he's had a lifelong fascination with resistance training. But the really cool thing is he talks about it, and he supports everything he's saying with obviously scientific literature. But he writes it in a way where he explains part of it with very basic concepts of biology and biochemistry, which make it very easy to understand. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how it's written, I suppose. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's good that it's, especially if he's using very basic concepts of biology and biochemistry, because that'll make it easier for, the layman, the average person, to be able to pick it up and get a good idea of why this works and why they should do this moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating. So another question that we had, but this has sort of already been answered in a roundabout way. If you could get every listener to make one simple change in their daily life to have the greatest positive impact on their health, what would you say it would be?
Do you know, I was thinking about this, and because obviously this is a question that I thought might come up, and I started writing stuff down, and I started with one word, and then I just wrote more and more, and I was like, oh no, the whole point is it just one thing I'm supposed to say, or a couple things?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how simple or complex the explanation is. What's important is how simple it is for the listener to apply this change to their life once they understand it. If
we're talking about just holistic health, I really think diet's got to be, I'd say diet's probably number one. Whole food diet, nutrient dense, pick whatever fad you want that works for you. We've talked about the slow carb diet. I think in terms of adherence, there's probably not much better out there in terms of options. So yeah, I think getting that right is so critical, and will increase the chance of living a longer, healthier life, free from disease, and obviously prevent things like obesity and diabetes and stuff like that. But I will just say a very, very close second is exercise, and particularly resistance training. Doesn't have to be high intensity training. Just anything where you're lifting weights or body weight or pushing against resistance is without doubt the most effective form of exercise. There are other things that are really important, but I think those two things are like right up top of my list.
Yeah, if you want to become the next Kratos or Achilles or whatever figure you want to refer to, you can dive in the deep end. But if really your goal is just to be healthy and live, a longer life free of a lot of complications, then just doing those two things will get you, like 95% of the way there, I'd say, at least.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without doubt.
Brilliant. All right. And for any of the people who are listening, if they're really interested in diving deep into this kind of stuff, if they want to learn how to become a corporate warrior, and not just 15 minutes, but if they want to learn more about you and, take in a lot more of this, where can they find you? What would be the best place to get in touch?
You'd be surprised. It might only take them 15 minutes to become it. So the website, if you search corporatewarrior.org, it will send you to a full list of all of my podcasts. So there's about, I think, 97 now. Oh, well, actually, it depends when this goes live, but there'll probably be close to 100 or even over. And you can literally just click the episode and see all of the links and show notes. I do very detailed show notes. So I list all of the studies, everything that's mentioned. So yeah, check it out, corporatewarrior.org.
Brilliant. And anything else you'd like people to follow you on social media, follow the podcast on iTunes, those sorts of things?
Do you know, I deliberately do like one call to action so people remember it. My guest lists like 8 things, and I'm like, okay, like they're never going to remember all those. But obviously I'm on Facebook and Twitter. My Twitter name is too hard to remember, so I will say Facebook. If you just search Corporate Warrior, I have a Facebook page. So yeah, check that out. And obviously, there's the great thing about the Facebook page is there's a lot of interesting discussion that takes place. Although that also happens on the blog too. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, no worries on the different channels. We can put that all up in the show notes. So if people want to dive deep, then they can take a closer look there. All right. It's been great chatting with you, Lawrence. I appreciate you coming on.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, to get your free high-intensity training Google Progress chart and ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Day Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are deliberately not verbatim. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, enter your email address, then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.